The first snowfall of December blanketed the streets of Brooklyn in a soft, pristine glow. For most of the students at East Brook High, it marked the beginning of their favorite time of year. The hallways were alive with the cheer of Christmas. Twinkling lights hung from lockers, wreaths adorned classroom doors, and students hummed carols as they passed. Yet, for Emily Carter, the holiday season only intensified her feelings of isolation. Emily was one of the few black students at East Brook High, a prestigious school known for its academic rigor, but not for its diversity. Her parents, Linda and George Carter, had worked tirelessly to give her the opportunities they never had, moving to a neighborhood where she could attend a better school. Yet from her first day as a freshman, Emily had felt out of place. Over the years, she'd become an academic standout, a quiet leader on the debate team, and a gifted writer whose essays were often used as examples in class. But no amount of achievement could shield her from the subtle, and often not so subtle barbs of her classmates. This year, the bullying had reached a crescendo. It wasn't just the microaggressions like being excluded from group projects or hearing whispered comments about her natural hair. It was the direct attacks. A month earlier, during a class discussion on systemic racism, Emily had spoken passionately about the lingering effects of inequality in the education system. "Why is it," she had asked, "that schools in majority black neighborhoods get less funding, fewer resources, and overcrowded classrooms?" Her words had barely left her lips when a boy from the back row laughed. "Maybe if your people stopped complaining and worked harder, you wouldn't have those problems," he sneered. The laughter that followed wasn't universal, but it was loud enough. Emily's teacher had offered a weak reprimand, but the damage was done. By lunchtime, someone had turned the comment into a meme, pairing it with an unflattering photo of Emily speaking in class. It spread like wildfire through the school's social media channels. Emily spent that night in her room, staring at the ceiling and fighting back tears. Her mother knocked softly on the door before entering. "I know today was hard," Linda said, sitting beside her on the bed. "I went through the same things at your age. It doesn't make it right, but I want you to know you're not alone." Emily turned to her mother, her voice trembling. "How did you deal with it, Mom? It feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough. I'm either too loud or too quiet, too ambitious or not good enough. I don't know who I'm supposed to be." Linda took her daughter's hands in hers. "You're supposed to be you. Strong, brilliant, and brave. The world may try to silence you, but you have a voice, Emily. Use it." She reached into her bag and handed Emily a small, dog-eared journal. "This was mine when I was your age. Writing helped me find my strength. Maybe it can help you too." Over the next few weeks, Emily poured her heart into that journal. She wrote about her dreams, her fears, and the pain of feeling invisible in a school full of people who refused to see her. Her writing became a refuge, a way to process her emotions and reclaim her identity. As Christmas approached, the school began preparing for its annual graduation ceremony, where the valedictorian would deliver a speech to the entire school community. Emily, with her near-perfect GPA, had earned the honor. But when the announcement was made, it felt more like a burden than a celebration. "I can't do it," Emily told her parents that night at dinner. "If I get up there, they'll just laugh or find some way to twist my words again. It's not worth it." Her father, George, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. "Emily, I won't pretend to know exactly what you're feeling, but I do know this. Your voice matters. Those kids laughing at you, they're afraid of what you have to say because it's powerful. Don't let them take that away from you." Linda nodded in agreement. "You've been given a platform, Emily. Not everyone gets that. What if this is your chance to make them listen?" Emily thought about their words long after dinner. She stayed up late that night, staring at a blank page in her journal. Slowly, she began to write. At first, it was just fragments of ideas, but soon the words began to flow. She didn't just want to address the racism she had faced. She wanted to inspire change. By the time she finished her draft, the sun was beginning to rise. Emily read the speech aloud to herself, her voice growing stronger with each word. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. In the days leading up to the ceremony, Emily continued to refine her speech, drawing strength from her family and her faith. She prayed for courage, asking God to help her find the right words to reach the hearts of those who had hurt her. On Christmas Eve, the day of the ceremony, she stood backstage, clutching the microphone and trembling with nerves. The auditorium was packed with students, parents, and faculty. Emily's classmates sat in the front row, their expressions a mix of curiosity and indifference. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the stage. As she began to speak, the room fell silent. Emily's voice, steady and clear, carried a message that no one had expected. One of pain, yes, but also resilience, forgiveness, and hope. She spoke about the strength it takes to rise above hate, the importance of empathy, and the power of unity. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. What had started as a speech for her classmates became a rallying cry for a better future, and it would soon capture the attention of the entire nation. As Emily finished her speech, a wave of silence washed over the auditorium. It wasn't the heavy, awkward silence she'd experienced in classrooms after being mocked. It was the kind of silence that precedes change. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt truly seen, but the road to that stage had been anything but easy. In the weeks leading up to her speech, Emily faced mounting pressure from all sides. Whispers about her valedictorian speech circulated throughout the school. Some students scoffed, joking about what woke nonsense she would say, while others quietly hoped she might address the issues that had long been swept under the rug. Teachers avoided the topic entirely, offering polite but hollow congratulations. Only her debate coach, Mr. Patel, pulled her aside after practice one afternoon. "Emily," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I know you're carrying a lot right now, but remember this. When you speak your truth, it doesn't just free you, it can free others too. Don't hold back." His words echoed in her mind as she worked on her speech. She thought about the quiet glances of solidarity from other minority students, the few friends who had stood by her, and the overwhelming support from her family. These became her anchors, reminding her of the bigger picture. At home, Emily's parents supported her in every way they could. Her mother read drafts of the speech, offering small suggestions while emphasizing the importance of keeping her voice authentic. Her father, a man of few words but profound wisdom, often sat nearby, occasionally reminding her to stay focused on her purpose. "It's not about them," George said one evening, pointing to the pages of notes spread across the dining table. "It's about you and what you want to leave behind." Despite their encouragement, there were moments when Emily felt overwhelmed. Doubts crept in late at night, whispering that her words wouldn't matter, that she'd be dismissed or ridiculed. But each time she found herself turning to the journal her mother had given her. Writing became her sanctuary, a place where she could channel her fears into courage. The day of the ceremony arrived faster than Emily had anticipated. She woke early that morning, her stomach a bundle of nerves. Outside, the streets were blanketed in fresh snow, the sky clear and bright. Her family gathered around her before they left for the school, forming a circle of prayer. "God, give Emily the strength to speak with honesty and love," Linda prayed, her voice steady. "Let her words touch hearts and spark change." Emily felt the warmth of their hands and the power of their support. It gave her the courage she needed as she walked into the auditorium. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. Holiday music played as students filed in, wearing their caps and gowns. The principal gave a speech about perseverance and hard work, and a few awards were handed out. But as Emily's name was announced, the room shifted. The chatter died down, replaced by an expectant hush. Walking to the podium, Emily felt every pair of eyes on her. She placed her speech on the stand and adjusted the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. Taking a deep breath, she began. "When I first came to Eastbrook High," Emily said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest, "I thought success would protect me. I thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, I'd be seen for who I am. But over the years, I've learned a painful truth. For some of us, no amount of success is ever enough to erase prejudice." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, but Emily continued, undeterred. "I'm not here to accuse or blame. I'm here to tell the truth. Because the truth matters. This isn't just my story. It's the story of so many students who feel invisible, who feel like they don't belong. And I think it's time we stop pretending it's not happening." As Emily spoke, she scanned the room, her gaze landing on familiar faces. Some classmates looked away while others watched with wide eyes. Her parents sat in the middle row, their expressions a mix of pride and emotion. She spoke about the systemic challenges facing minority students, weaving her personal experiences with larger truths. But she didn't stop there. Emily ended her speech with a call for unity and change. "We can't fix what we don't face," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "This holiday season, as we celebrate together, I challenge each of you to think about how we can do better, not just as individuals, but as a community. Let's make this a place where every student feels seen, valued, and supported. It won't be easy, but I believe we're capable of more." When she finished, there was a pause, a heavy, breathless pause, before the room erupted into applause. Some students stood, clapping enthusiastically. Others wiped away tears. Even teachers, many of whom had remained silent during her struggles, joined in the ovation. Emily's heart raced as she stepped away from the podium. She hadn't expected such a response. Her classmates began to approach her one by one. Some offered apologies. Others thanked her for her courage. A girl from her math class, who had never spoken to her before, hugged her tightly. "You're incredible," the girl whispered. "Thank you for saying what needed to be said." By the end of the ceremony, Emily realized that something had shifted, not just in the school, but in herself. For the first time, she felt the weight of her voice, the power it carried. As she left the auditorium with her family, snow falling softly around them, Emily looked up at the sky and smiled. This Christmas, she had given the world a gift she hadn't expected, the gift of truth, and in doing so, she had found her own peace. The days following Emily's speech were surreal. What she had expected to be a quiet return to routine quickly turned into a whirlwind of attention, both within and beyond the walls of Eastbrook High. Students who had once ignored her now stopped her in the halls, offering words of praise or hesitant apologies. Teachers who had remained silent during the incident in her class approached her with newfound respect, thanking her for her bravery. But the most unexpected response came from the wider community. Unbeknownst to Emily, a parent in the audience had recorded her speech and shared it on social media. By the time Emily returned home that evening, the video had gone viral. Her words resonated far beyond the auditorium, touching the hearts of viewers across the nation. The hashtag #EmilySpeaks began trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of resilience and overcoming prejudice. At first, Emily was overwhelmed. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, messages from old friends, distant relatives, and even strangers. She read through dozens of comments online, some praising her courage, others sharing how her speech had inspired them. But mixed in with the support were the inevitable voices of dissent. "She's just playing the victim," one comment read. "Another kid whining about racism instead of working harder," said another. Emily's heart sank as she scrolled through the negativity. The same insecurities she had battled before began to creep back in. Was she really making a difference? Or was this just another moment that would fade into the noise of the internet? Her parents noticed her retreat into herself. That evening, Linda sat beside Emily on the couch, her face soft with concern. "You're carrying a lot, Emily," she said gently. "But remember, this isn't just about you anymore. Your words have started something bigger. You've sparked conversations that needed to happen." Emily nodded, but the weight of it all still pressed heavily on her chest. "What if it's not enough, Mom? What if nothing changes?" Linda smiled knowingly. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It's like planting a seed. You may not see it grow right away, but that doesn't mean it won't. You've done your part by planting the seed. Now let others nurture it." Her father chimed in from the kitchen where he was preparing dinner. "And don't let those negative comments get to you, Em. People fear what they don't understand. But you've got something they can't take away: the truth." Feeling somewhat reassured, Emily decided to focus on the positives. She responded to messages from students at other schools who shared their experiences and expressed their admiration. One email stood out. It was from a local journalist who wanted to feature Emily's story in the newspaper. Nervous but excited, Emily agreed to the interview, seeing it as an opportunity to reach an even wider audience. The journalist, a young black woman named Tasha Lewis, arrived at the Carter household 2 days later. She greeted Emily warmly, immediately putting her at ease. "Emily, I want to start by saying how proud I am of you," Tasha said as they sat down in the living room. "I wish I'd had your courage when I was your age." The interview was a mix of reflection and hope. Emily spoke candidly about her experiences at Eastbrook High, the challenges of being one of the few black students, and the moment that pushed her to write her speech. She also shared her dreams for the future, A future where students like her wouldn't have to fight so hard to be heard. When the article was published, it garnered even more attention than the original video. Local organizations reached out to invite Emily to speak at events, and a prominent education activist mentioned her story in a televised interview. The support was overwhelming, but it also came with new challenges. Back at school, not everyone was thrilled about Emily's newfound fame. Some students accused her of seeking attention, claiming that her speech had exaggerated the problems at Eastbrook. Others resented the spotlight it brought to their school, which was now under scrutiny for its lack of diversity and inclusion efforts. One afternoon, Emily overheard a group of classmates in the cafeteria. "She's acting like she's some kind of hero," one girl said, rolling her eyes. "Yeah, like she's the only one who's ever had a tough time," another added. Emily felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment, but she refused to let their words undo her progress. Instead, she turned her focus to the students who had quietly begun to rally around her. A small but growing group of peers started discussing ways to improve the school's culture, organizing meetings and drafting proposals for new diversity initiatives. Emily became an unofficial leader of the group, helping to amplify their voices while staying true to her own. Together, they planned a student-led forum to address the issues raised by her speech. The event, scheduled for early January, would bring together students, parents, and faculty for an open dialogue about race, inclusion, and the changes needed at Eastbrook High. As Christmas Day approached, Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe. She spent the morning with her family, exchanging gifts and laughing over breakfast. The snow outside sparkled in the sunlight, and for the first time in months, Emily felt a sense of peace. Later that evening, she sat by the window with her journal, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about the fear she had felt before her speech, the strength it had taken to speak her truth, and the unexpected journey that followed. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a direct message from a young girl in Alabama. "Hi, Emily," the message read. "I saw your speech, and it made me feel like I'm not alone. I've been dealing with a lot at my school, but now I feel like I can stand up for myself too. Thank you for being so brave." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. In that moment, she realized that her journey was just beginning. She didn't have all the answers, but she had found her purpose, and with faith, family, and determination, she knew she could continue to make a difference. The first week of January arrived, and with it the long-anticipated student-led forum at Eastbrook High. The air buzzed with a mix of excitement and tension as students, teachers, and parents gathered in the school gymnasium. Rows of chairs were arranged in a semicircle, with a podium and microphones set up at the front. The turnout exceeded everyone's expectations. What had started as a small initiative by Emily and her group had grown into a full-scale community event. Emily sat with her friends, clutching her notebook tightly. She had been chosen to open the forum with a brief address, and though she had spoken in front of large audiences before, this felt different. This time she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was representing an entire movement within her school. When the principal stepped up to the microphone to introduce her, Emily took a deep breath and stood. The room grew quiet as she made her way to the podium. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady but soft. "Thank you for being here tonight. When I gave my graduation speech last month, I never imagined it would lead to this moment. What started as a reflection of my personal experiences has sparked conversations about how we, as a school and as a community, can do better." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some were familiar, her parents, friends, and supportive teachers. Others were strangers, parents, and community members who had come to listen. But scattered among the crowd were a few skeptical faces, students and even some faculty members who had resisted the changes her speech had inspired. "I want to be clear," Emily continued. "This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about acknowledging the ways we've fallen short and finding a way forward together. Change isn't easy, but I believe it's possible." The applause that followed was polite, if not entirely enthusiastic. Emily returned to her seat, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. The forum moved into its next phase, with members of the student group sharing personal stories and proposals for improving the school's culture. It was during the open discussion portion of the event that the first major twist occurred. A parent stood up, her expression tight with frustration. "I understand the need for change," she said, her voice carrying a sharp edge. But what I don't understand is why we're focusing so much on issues of race. My son has been bullied for years. Shouldn't we be addressing all forms of discrimination? The question hung in the air, heavy and divisive. Emily's heart sank. She had anticipated resistance, but the bluntness of the comment caught her off guard. Before Emily could respond, another voice chimed in. This time, it was Mr. Patel, her debate coach. With all due respect, he said, his tone measured. Acknowledging one form of discrimination doesn't negate others. The experiences Emily and her peers have shared are real and deserve attention. Addressing racial inequality isn't about exclusion. It's about inclusion. When we make our school a better place for them, we make it a better place for everyone. The parent sat down, her expression unreadable. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, but the discussion moved on. Still, the tension lingered, casting a shadow over the rest of the forum. As the event wound down, Emily felt a mix of pride and frustration. The turnout had been larger than expected, and many of the proposals were well received. But the pushback from certain parents and students reminded her that change wouldn't come easily. Later that night, as Emily sat in her room reflecting on the evening, she received an email from an unexpected sender, the principal, Mrs. Donovan. The subject line read, "Follow-up discussion." Curious but cautious, Emily opened the email. "Dear Emily, I wanted to commend you on your efforts tonight. Your speech and leadership have sparked important conversations, and I'm grateful for your dedication to making Eastbrook High a better place. That said, I believe it's important for us to discuss how we move forward as a school community. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and the student group leaders to review the forum's outcomes and plan next steps. Sincerely, Mrs. Donovan." Emily stared at the screen, unsure of how to feel. On one hand, the email seemed supportive. On the other, the principal's sudden involvement felt strategic, almost as if she were trying to regain control of a narrative that had grown beyond her expectations. The next morning, Emily shared the email with her group. Opinions were divided. Some saw it as a positive step, while others were wary of the administration's intentions. "I think they just want to water down our message," said Maria, one of Emily's closest allies. "They've been quiet this whole time, and now that the community's paying attention, they want to swoop in and take credit." "Maybe," Emily said, "but this could also be an opportunity. If we're at the table, we can make sure our voices are heard." The group eventually agreed to meet with Mrs. Donovan, but they decided to prepare carefully. They spent hours reviewing their proposals, anticipating counterarguments, and practicing how to present their case. When the meeting finally took place, it was a tense but productive exchange. Mrs. Donovan listened intently as Emily and her peers outlined their ideas, occasionally nodding in agreement. However, when it came to implementing their proposals, she was more cautious. "These are ambitious ideas," she said, "but change takes time. We have to consider the resources available and the perspectives of all stakeholders." It was a carefully worded response, one that acknowledged their efforts without committing to immediate action. Emily left the meeting feeling both hopeful and frustrated. The principal's words echoed the challenges she had faced throughout her journey. Progress, but always at a measured pace. That night, Emily's phone buzzed with another notification. This time it was a message from Tasha Lewis, the journalist who had written the original article about her. "Emily, I've been following your story, and I think there's more to tell. Are you open to meeting again? I believe your journey is just beginning." Emily stared at the message, a sense of purpose reigniting within her. Tasha was right. This was only the beginning. Emily sat at her desk rereading Tasha Lewis's message. The journalist had been one of her biggest supporters, amplifying her story to a wider audience. Emily couldn't help but feel that this next step could either propel her cause forward or bring more scrutiny than she was prepared for. But one thing was clear. She wasn't ready to let the momentum fade. The next day, Emily replied to Tasha, agreeing to meet. By the weekend, the two sat across from each other in a cozy coffee shop in downtown Brooklyn. Snow fell softly outside the window, but inside, the conversation was warm and electric with possibility. "Emily," Tasha began, her notebook open, "you've sparked something bigger than just a school conversation. People are listening. The question now is, how do you keep this going? What's the next step?" Emily stirred her hot chocolate thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that a lot," she admitted. I don't want this to just be about me. It's about creating real change, not just at my school but in other places where students feel invisible. Tasha nodded, jotting down notes. What if we frame this as a movement? Something that extends beyond Eastbrook High. Your voice could inspire students everywhere to push for better representation and inclusion in their schools. The idea filled Emily with equal parts excitement and apprehension. A movement. That sounded monumental, far beyond what she'd envisioned when she first stepped up to that podium. But the more they discussed it, the more the pieces started falling into place. Tasha suggested organizing a series of workshops and talks at other schools, starting locally and expanding outward. By the end of their meeting, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tasha promised to help connect her with other activists and educators, while Emily committed to rallying her peers to take their initiatives further. Back at Eastbrook High, reactions to the forum were still rippling through the school. For some, it had been a turning point, a moment of reckoning that forced them to confront their biases. For others, it was little more than an uncomfortable evening they were eager to forget. Emily noticed these divides everywhere she went. Teachers who had once been indifferent now treated her with visible respect, some even stopping her in the hallway to commend her efforts. But there were also whispers of discontent from students who resented the attention she was receiving. "Here comes St. Emily," one boy muttered sarcastically as she walked past his locker. His friends snickered, but Emily kept her head high. She had learned to tune out the noise, focusing instead on those who truly wanted to be part of the change. One of those people was Rachel, a junior who had always been quiet in class. A few days after the forum, she approached Emily in the library. "Hi, Emily," she said shyly, clutching a stack of books. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. It's been hard for me, too, and seeing you stand up like that, it gave me hope." Emily smiled warmly. "Thank you, Rachel. That means a lot. If there's ever anything you want to talk about, or if you want to join our group, you're more than welcome." Rachel nodded, her eyes lighting up. "I'd like that." Moments like these reminded Emily why she had started this journey, but they also underscored how much work still needed to be done. The meeting with Mrs. Donovan and the school administration had yielded some small victories. The principal agreed to implement mandatory diversity training for teachers and create a student advisory board to address inclusion issues. While these steps felt like progress, Emily and her group knew they were only the beginning. One afternoon, during a planning session with her peers, Maria voiced what many of them were thinking. "These changes are great," she said, "but they're so surface level. Diversity training is important, sure, but it won't fix the way some students treat people like us." Emily nodded. "You're right. This isn't just about policies. It's about changing the culture, and that's going to take time." They brainstormed ways to make a deeper impact, from hosting events that celebrated different cultures to creating mentorship programs for younger students. The idea that excited them most, however, was starting a peer-led discussion series, where students could share their experiences and learn from one another in a safe space. "Maybe if people actually hear our stories," said Malik, another member of the group, "they'll start to see us as more than stereotypes." Emily agreed. "We need to break down those walls. If we can get even a few people to really listen, it could make a difference." As January progressed, Emily found herself juggling more responsibilities than ever. Between school, her activist efforts, and her growing presence in the community, her days were packed. But she also found solace in the support of her family and friends. One evening, as she worked on a proposal for the peer discussion series, her father entered the room with a small, wrapped package. "What's this?" Emily asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it," George said, a rare smile spreading across his face. Inside was a leather-bound journal embossed with her initials. Emily's breath caught. "I figured you might need a new one," her father said. "You've been filling up that old one pretty fast." Emily hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Dad. This means so much." George patted her shoulder. "Keep writing, Em. You've got a lot more to say." As Emily continued her work, the buzz around her speech and the forum began to draw attention from larger organizations. One day, she received an email from a nonprofit that focused on educational equity, inviting her to speak at an upcoming conference. The invitation was both thrilling and daunting. Emily knew this was an incredible opportunity to amplify her message, but she also worried about stepping into such a prominent spotlight. She confided in her mother, who reminded her of the strength she had already shown. "Emily, you've been given this platform for a reason," Linda said. "Don't be afraid to use it. You've already changed so much, and you're just getting started." Emily nodded, determination hardening in her chest. She didn't have all the answers, but she was learning to embrace the uncertainty. Step by step, she was building something bigger than herself, a movement that could inspire others to find their own voices. The winter chill had settled deep into Brooklyn, but Emily's days felt hotter and more intense than ever. The invitation from the nonprofit conference had sparked a new level of attention. While it was a prestigious opportunity, it also placed her under a sharper lens. Some praised her as a rising leader, while others grew increasingly critical, accusing her of using her school's problems for personal gain. It wasn't just the whispers from her classmates anymore. Parents of other students had begun voicing their concerns at PTA meetings, with a few openly criticizing Emily's growing presence in the media. "I don't think it's appropriate for a student to represent the entire school in this way," one parent declared at a meeting. "It's creating unnecessary tension, and frankly, it's putting a target on our kids' backs." Mrs. Donovan, the principal, defended Emily publicly, stating that the school supported its students in advocating for change. But privately, Emily began to feel the pressure of balancing her activism with the expectations of her school and community. One of the complications came from an unexpected source: her longtime friend Sarah. The two had been inseparable in middle school, but their friendship had grown strained over the years, as Emily became more vocal about her experiences with racism. Sarah, who came from a more affluent and sheltered background, often struggled to fully understand Emily's perspective. During lunch one day, Sarah approached Emily, her expression a mix of frustration and uncertainty. "Can we talk?" she asked, sitting down across from Emily in the cafeteria. "Of course," Emily said, setting her notebook aside. Sarah hesitated before speaking. "Look, I think what you're doing is really brave, but don't you think it's making things worse? I mean, everyone's so tense now, and it feels like you're putting people on edge. Maybe it would be better to, I don't know, tone it down a little?" Emily's chest tightened. "Tone it down?" she repeated, her voice calm but firm. "Sarah, do you have any idea what it feels like to walk through this school every day and know that most people don't see you as their equal? This isn't about making people uncomfortable. It's about making things better." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I get that, but it's not like everyone here is racist, Emily. And now it feels like you're making them out to be." Emily took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Sarah, I'm not saying everyone here is racist. What I'm saying is that there's a culture that allows these problems to exist. If we don't address it, nothing changes. I get that it's hard to hear, but imagine how much harder it is to live it every day." Sarah looked down, her face a mix of guilt and defensiveness. I don't know. I miss when things weren't so complicated." Emily smiled sadly. "So do I. But things were always complicated for me. You just didn't see it before." The conversation ended on an uncertain note, and Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of it for the rest of the day. Losing Sarah's support hurt, but it also reminded her that change often came with sacrifices. Meanwhile, her group at school faced their own challenges. While some of their proposals had gained traction, others were met with resistance from the administration. The idea for a peer-led discussion series, in particular, hit a roadblock when Mrs. Donovan expressed concerns about sensitive topics being discussed without faculty oversight. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," Mrs. Donovan said during a meeting with the group, "but we have to ensure that these discussions are productive and respectful. I'm not saying no, I'm saying we need to approach this carefully." Maria was livid after the meeting. "Carefully," she exclaimed as they walked out of the office. "That's just their way of stalling. They don't want us talking about the real issues." Emily tried to stay optimistic. "It's frustrating, but it's not a no. We'll keep pushing." Still, the resistance was disheartening, and Emily could see the strain it was putting on her peers. Malik, who had been one of the group's most vocal members, started skipping meetings, citing exhaustion and frustration. "I just don't know if it's worth it anymore," he admitted to Emily one afternoon. "We're fighting so hard and it feels like we're barely making a dent." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "I get it, Malik. I feel that way too sometimes. But every step forward matters, no matter how small. If we give up now, nothing will change." Malik nodded, though his expression remained weary. Amidst these challenges, Emily received unexpected encouragement from an unlikely ally, Mr. Wilson, the history teacher who had largely stayed neutral during her struggles. After class one day, he asked her to stay behind. "Emily," he began, closing the classroom door, "I've been watching everything unfold these past few months, and I want you to know how proud I am of you." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson, but I didn't think you supported what I was doing." He smiled faintly. "I do. I just didn't know how to express it. To be honest, I've been reflecting on my own biases, things I didn't even realize were there. Your speech made me think, and I want to do better. If there's any way I can help, please let me know." Emily's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. That means a lot." His support gave her a much-needed boost, reminding her that change often started with small, individual shifts in perspective. As January turned to February, Emily found herself at a crossroads. The pressures were mounting, and the challenges seemed endless. But with each obstacle, she grew more determined. The peer-led discussion series was eventually approved with faculty oversight, and Emily threw herself into organizing the first session. On the day of the event, the turnout was modest but encouraging. Students from different backgrounds shared their stories, some for the first time. The atmosphere was raw and emotional, but also hopeful. After the session, a freshman named Isaiah approached Emily. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said quietly. "Hearing everyone's stories made me feel like I'm not alone." Emily smiled, her exhaustion melting into resolve. Moments like these reminded her why she had started this journey. The road ahead was long, but step by step, she was helping to pave the way for others. February stretched on, bringing both new opportunities and heavier challenges. Emily's activism was gaining recognition outside Eastbrook High, and her upcoming speech at the nonprofit conference loomed on the horizon. But even as she prepared for her next big moment, the emotional toll of her journey began to weigh on her in unexpected ways. The peer-led discussion series, though a success in many ways, also became a source of tension. After the first session, some students openly praised the event for giving them a space to share and listen, while others dismissed it as pointless venting. This divide only seemed to grow as more sessions took place, and Emily often found herself caught in the middle, trying to balance her role as a leader with her own emotional exhaustion. One afternoon, during a particularly heated discussion, a student named Jake, a junior known for his contrarian attitude, challenged the entire premise of the series. "I just don't see the point of all this," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We've been talking about these issues for weeks, but nothing's really changing. It feels like we're just spinning our wheels." A murmur of agreement rippled through a small section of the room. Emily felt a pang of frustration, but kept her composure. "I get what you're saying, Jake," she replied calmly, "but change doesn't happen overnight. These conversations are just the beginning. They're about building understanding so we can create a foundation for action." Jake shrugged. "Maybe. But I think some people just like to complain instead of actually doing something." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Emily could feel the eyes of her peers on her, waiting to see how she would respond. "Jake," she said, her voice steady but firm, "sharing our experiences isn't complaining. It's a way of being heard, of validating the struggles that people face every day. If we don't acknowledge those struggles, how can we move forward?" Jake didn't reply, but his expression remained skeptical. Emily moved on, but the exchange stayed with her, gnawing at her confidence. Later that evening, Emily confided in her mother as they cleaned up after dinner. "Sometimes I feel like no matter what I say or do, it's never enough," Emily admitted, scrubbing a dish with unnecessary force. "People like Jake think I'm just stirring up trouble, and even the ones who support me expect me to have all the answers." Linda handed her a towel and gave her a knowing look. "Emily, you're not responsible for fixing everything. All you can do is your best, and remember, not everyone's going to understand what you're doing right away. That doesn't mean it's not worth doing." Emily sighed, drying her hands. "I just wish it didn't feel so lonely sometimes." Linda pulled her into a hug. "You're not alone, baby. You've got us, and you've got a whole group of people who believe in you. Focus on them." At school, Emily's friendships continued to shift in unexpected ways. Sarah, still struggling to reconcile their differences, began distancing herself further. Meanwhile, Rachel and Malik became two of Emily's closest allies, often staying late after school to help plan events and brainstorm new initiatives. One evening, as the three of them sat in the library poring over their notes, Malik brought up something that had been bothering him. "Do you ever feel like we're stuck?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "Like no matter how hard we push, the system just pushes back harder." Rachel nodded. "All the time. It's like for every step forward, we're forced to take 2 steps back." Emily looked between them, feeling the weight of their words. "I know it feels that way," she said softly. "And honestly, I feel it too. But every time I think about giving up, I remember why we started this. It's not about changing everything all at once. It's about planting seeds. Even if we don't see the results right away, they'll grow eventually." Her words seemed to reassure them, but they also served as a reminder to herself. She couldn't let doubt derail her progress. As the conference date approached, Emily found herself juggling her school responsibilities with intense preparations. Tasha Lewis had been helping her craft her speech, pushing her to dig deeper into her experiences and articulate her vision for the future. "You've got a unique voice, Emily," Tasha said during one of their sessions. "Use it. Don't be afraid to get personal. Your story is what connects people to the larger message." Emily hesitated. "But what if I share too much? What if people twist my words?" Tasha smiled knowingly. "That's always a risk, but you can't let fear silence you. Speak your truth, and trust that the right people will hear it." The night before the conference, Emily's nerves hit an all-time high. She paced her room, going over her speech again and again. Her father knocked on the door and peeked inside. "Still at it?" he asked, stepping into the room. Emily nodded. "I just want it to be perfect." George sat down on the edge of her bed. "Emily, nothing in life is ever perfect, and you don't have to be either. Just speak from the heart. That's what people will remember." His words eased her anxiety, and by the time she went to bed, she felt a little more confident. The conference itself was a whirlwind. Held in a large auditorium downtown, it was attended by educators, activists, and students from across the city. As Emily stepped onto the stage, her heart pounded in her chest, but she steadied herself with a deep breath. Her speech was a powerful mix of personal anecdotes and bold calls to action. She spoke about the challenges she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and her vision for a more inclusive education system. By the time she finished, the audience was on its feet, their applause thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people approached her, thanking her for her words and sharing their own stories. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of clarity. She might not have all the answers, but she knew she was on the right path. The glow of the conference lingered with Emily for days. The thunderous applause and heartfelt conversations afterward had reaffirmed her commitment to her cause, but the elation was short-lived. Back at Eastbrook High, tensions reached a breaking point. The first sign came in the form of a school-wide email from the principal. Mrs. Donovan announced a listening session to address concerns raised by parents and students about the recent initiatives. The email's tone was carefully neutral, but Emily couldn't help but feel uneasy. "What do you think this is about?" Malik asked as they sat in the library after reading the email. "I think it's a way to appease the people who don't like what we're doing," Maria said, crossing her arms. "They'll call it a discussion, but it'll just be another way to shut us down." Emily wasn't sure what to think. She wanted to believe the administration was acting in good faith, but after months of resistance and half-hearted support, doubt gnawed at her. The listening session, held in the school auditorium, was packed. Students, parents, and faculty filled the seats, and a panel, including Mrs. Donovan and a few teachers, sat at a long table at the front. Emily and her group sat together, their presence both a statement and a source of comfort. The session began with the principal reiterating the school's commitment to creating an inclusive environment. But as the floor opened for comments, the atmosphere quickly grew charged. One parent stood, her voice tight with frustration. "I'm all for inclusion," she said, "but it feels like the school is prioritizing one group over others. My son has faced bullying too, but we're not holding forums about that." A teacher chimed in, cautiously supporting the parent's point. "We need to be careful not to alienate students who feel unfairly targeted by these discussions." Emily's hands clenched in her lap. The words weren't directed at her by name, but she felt their weight all the same. Before she could respond, another voice rose, this time from an unexpected ally. Rachel stood up, her normally soft voice carrying an edge of determination. "With all due respect," she began, "these discussions aren't about targeting anyone. They're about addressing real issues that have been ignored for too long. And honestly, if you're more worried about feeling uncomfortable than about what's actually happening to students like Emily, maybe that's part of the problem." The room buzzed with murmurs, a mix of support and skepticism. Emily shot Rachel a grateful smile, but the moment of solidarity was short-lived. As the session continued, the tension in the room grew. A few students, emboldened by the parents' comments, began airing their grievances about how they felt unfairly labeled by the recent initiatives. "I feel like we're being accused of being racist just because we're white," one boy said, his voice trembling with anger. "It's not fair." Emily finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "No one is accusing anyone of anything. What we're asking for is acknowledgement of the challenges we face, of the things that need to change. This isn't about blame, it's about accountability." Her words seemed to resonate with some, but others remained visibly resistant. By the time the session ended, Emily felt emotionally drained. The divide within the school had never been clearer. The aftermath of the listening session rippled through Eastbrook High. Social media exploded with debates, some praising Emily and her group for their courage, others accusing them of creating division. A new anonymous Instagram account, Eastbrook Truths, appeared, posting inflammatory memes and comments mocking the diversity initiatives. One post featured a caricature of Emily standing at a podium with the caption, "Emily Carter, CEO of Playing the Victim." Another read, "How about we talk about real problems for once?" The posts stung, not because they held any truth, but because they spread like wildfire. Emily found herself scrolling through the account late at night, unable to look away from the vitriol. "Don't let it get to you," Malik said the next day when she mentioned it. "Whoever's running that account is just a coward hiding behind a screen." Maria wasn't so forgiving. "We should report it, they're targeting you, and it's harassment." Emily hesitated. "Maybe. But part of me thinks responding will just give them more attention. I don't want to add fuel to the fire." Amid the rising tension, another surprise came. A direct message on Emily's Instagram from an unfamiliar account. The message read, "Hey, I don't agree with everything you're saying, but I think you've made some good points. There's a lot of stuff going on at this school that no one talks about. I just thought you should know. Not everyone's against you. Keep going." Emily stared at the message, conflicted. It was anonymous, but the tone felt genuine. It reminded her that even among the critics, there were people who were quietly listening, perhaps even reconsidering their views. Things took another turn when Emily received an email from Mrs. Donovan. The subject line was ominous. "Upcoming meeting. Urgent." Emily's stomach churned as she opened the email. "Dear Emily, I'd like to meet with you and your peers to discuss some recent developments regarding the school's diversity initiatives. Please let me know your availability this week. Sincerely, Mrs. Donovan." The email was vague, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. At the meeting, Mrs. Donovan's demeanor was cordial but serious. She commended Emily and her group for their efforts, but expressed concern about the polarization within the school community. "We need to find a way to bring people together," she said. "The initiatives we've started are important, but they're also causing tension. I'm asking for your help in finding a way to address these concerns constructively." Maria bristled. "So, you're saying it's our responsibility to fix the tension that's coming from people who don't want to change?" Mrs. Donovan hesitated. "I'm saying that leadership often means bridging divides, even when it's difficult." Emily felt torn. She understood the principal's position, but the weight of being asked to do even more was overwhelming. She left the meeting with a heavy heart, wondering how much more she could carry. As she walked home that evening, snowflakes falling around her, Emily thought about all the people who had supported her, the voices that had joined her cause, and the ones that still resisted. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain. She couldn't stop now. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed, its sound clear and resolute. It reminded her of something her mother always said, "When you walk in your purpose, the path will show itself." Emily didn't know where the path would lead, but she was determined to keep walking. Emily couldn't shake the conversation with Mrs. Donovan. The principal's request to bridge divides left her with a bitter taste. It felt like another way to place the burden of change squarely on her shoulders. Still, as a leader, she knew she had to consider the larger picture. Change couldn't come at the expense of leaving others behind, no matter how frustrating their resistance. But as Emily navigated this challenge, other relationships began shifting in unexpected ways. One cold morning in February, Sarah approached Emily in the hallway, her expression tentative. "Hey," she said softly, falling into step beside Emily. "Hey," Emily replied, her tone cautious but not unkind. Sarah fidgeted with the strap of her backpack. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about how things were always complicated for you, even when I didn't see it." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised by the admission. "Okay. I guess I just didn't want to believe it," Sarah continued, her voice tinged with guilt. "It's easier to pretend everything's fine than to face the fact that maybe I didn't do enough to support you." Emily paused, studying her friend. For so long she had hoped Sarah would acknowledge the distance that had grown between them. Now that the moment had come, she didn't know how to feel. "Sarah, I appreciate you saying that," Emily said finally. "But this isn't just about me. It's about recognizing the bigger picture and being willing to stand up even when it's uncomfortable." "I want to do better," Sarah said earnestly. "I don't know where to start, but I want to be there for you. For real this time." Emily's lips curved into a small smile. "That's a good place to start." Meanwhile, Rachel and Malik grew closer to Emily as their work continued. Rachel's quiet determination became a steady source of support, and Malik, despite his occasional doubts, often brought a much-needed dose of humor to their meetings. One evening, as they worked late in the school library, Malik looked up from his notebook with a mischievous grin. "Do you think they'll put up a statue of you one day, Em?" he teased. "You know, something like Emily Carter, professional troublemaker." Emily rolled her eyes, chuckling. "If they do, I'm making sure they put your name right there with mine. Malik Johnson, master of sarcasm." Rachel laughed, the sound light and genuine. For a moment, the weight of their work seemed to lift, replaced by the warmth of camaraderie. Outside the school, Emily's growing platform brought new opportunities and new complications. Tasha Lewis, the journalist who had helped Emily refine her story, reached out with an exciting proposal. "Emily," Tasha said during a phone call, "a local TV station is doing a special on youth activists, and they want to feature you. It's a great chance to share your work with a wider audience." Emily hesitated. While the idea of reaching more people was thrilling, she couldn't ignore the risks. Every time her story gained more attention, the backlash grew louder. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Thank you for the opportunity." When she discussed the offer with her parents that evening, they were divided. "It's an incredible opportunity," Linda said. "You've already shown how powerful your voice is. This could take your message even further." "But at what cost?" George countered. "Emily's already dealing with enough. The more attention she gets, the more these people will try to tear her down." Emily sat between them, torn. "I just want to focus on the work," she said quietly, "not the spotlight." Her parents exchanged a look, both understanding her conflict. "Whatever you decide," Linda said, resting a hand on Emily's shoulder, "we're behind you." Back at school, the anonymous Instagram account Eastbrook Truths continued to post inflammatory content. Despite her resolve to ignore it, Emily couldn't help but feel its shadow. One post in particular struck a nerve. It was a manipulated photo of the student group's first meeting, with the caption, "The real agenda, divide and conquer." "That account is getting out of hand," Maria said during one of their planning sessions. "We need to find out who's behind it." "Do we, though?" Rachel asked cautiously. "I mean, calling them out might just give them more power." Emily sighed. "Rachel's right. Engaging with them could backfire. But we can't let their noise drown out the work we're doing." As the weeks passed, Emily noticed subtle shifts in the school's atmosphere. The peer-led discussion series continued to grow, with more students attending each session. Some came out of curiosity, others out of genuine interest. A few even began sharing their own stories, including students Emily had never expected to hear from. One of those students was Jake, the skeptic who had openly questioned the series during an earlier session. During a meeting in mid-February, he raised his hand tentatively. "I just want to say," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "I still don't agree with everything we talk about here, but listening to people has made me think about stuff I hadn't considered before." Emily nodded, a spark of hope flickering in her chest. "That's all we're asking for, Jake. To think, to listen, and to grow. Then came another twist. One evening, Emily received an email from an unknown sender with the subject line, "Important. Please read." She opened it cautiously. The message was short but alarming. "I know who's running the Eastbrook Truths account. Meet me at the park tomorrow after school if you want to know more. Come alone." Emily's pulse quickened. The email felt cryptic, almost sinister, but also intriguing. Who would go to such lengths to share this information? And why now? When she told Malik and Rachel about the email the next morning, they both reacted with concern. "Emily, this sounds sketchy," Malik said, frowning. "You can't just show up alone." "He's right," Rachel added. "What if it's a trap or someone trying to intimidate you?" Emily considered their words carefully. "Maybe," she said. "But what if it's real? What if this is our chance to stop whoever's been trying to undermine everything we've worked for?" After a long discussion, they agreed on a plan. Emily would go to the park, but Malik and Rachel would wait nearby, ready to step in if anything went wrong. As Emily walked to the park that afternoon, her nerves were on edge. She didn't know what awaited her, but she was determined to face it head-on. The cold February air bit at Emily's cheeks as she approached the park. The barren trees cast long, skeletal shadows across the snow-dusted ground, and the quiet hum of the city felt more distant than usual. She clutched her phone tightly in her pocket, her heartbeat quickening with every step. Malik and Rachel trailed behind her at a distance, out of sight but close enough to intervene if necessary. Emily had insisted on coming alone, though their presence gave her a small sense of comfort. The email had instructed her to meet near the fountain, a central spot in the park. As she arrived, her eyes scanned the area. A figure stood by the edge of the fountain, bundled in a thick jacket with the hood pulled low. Emily hesitated, her breath visible in the icy air. "Hello?" she called, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. The figure turned, revealing a familiar face. It was Brian, a sophomore she recognized from her English class. He was quiet, rarely drawing attention to himself, and Emily struggled to reconcile this unassuming boy with the anonymous email she had received. "Brian?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. He glanced around nervously, shoving his hands deep into his jacket pockets. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually come." Emily took a cautious step closer. "What's going on? Why did you send me that email?" Brian shifted uncomfortably. "I know about the Instagram account. The one posting all that stuff about you in the group." Emily's breath caught. "How do you know?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Because I was part of it, at first." Her stomach turned. "What do you mean, part of it?" Brian sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It wasn't supposed to get this bad. A few of us started it as a joke, you know? Just stupid memes to make fun of how everyone was suddenly so serious about all this diversity stuff. But then it got out of hand. People started sending in stuff, and it got meaner and meaner. I didn't want to be part of it anymore, so I stopped." Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. "Who's still running it?" Brian glanced around nervously before lowering his voice. "It's mostly Dylan and his friends. They think it's funny stirring people up like this, but I don't know. It feels wrong now. That's why I wanted to tell you." Emily's mind raced. Dylan was a senior, part of a clique known for their arrogance and disdain for anyone who challenged the status quo. The pieces began falling into place. The inflammatory posts, the anonymous attacks. It all fit. "Why are you telling me this now?" Emily asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Brian flinched but didn't back away. "Because I saw the way people were treating you, and after the forum, I started thinking about what you said, about accountability. I guess I felt like I had to do something." Emily studied him for a long moment, her emotions swirling between anger and gratitude. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you for telling me, but if you really want to make this right, you have to help us stop it." Brian's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean you have to come forward," Emily said. "If we're going to hold them accountable, people need to know the truth." Brian's face paled. "I can't. If Dylan finds out I told you, you were brave enough to come here." Emily interrupted, her voice firm. "You can do this, Brian. It's the only way to fix what's been done." The following day, Emily met with Malik, Rachel, and Brian in the school library. Together, they drafted a plan to confront the situation. Brian agreed to share his story with Mrs. Donovan, providing screenshots of the group chats where Dylan and his friends had planned their posts. "This is going to blow up," Rachel said, her voice tinged with both anxiety and resolve. "That's the point," Emily replied. "They've been hiding behind anonymity for too long. It's time people see them for who they really are." The confrontation unfolded faster than any of them expected. After reviewing the evidence, Mrs. Donovan took swift action. Dylan and his friends were called into the office where they were confronted with the screenshots. Though they tried to deny their involvement, the proof was undeniable. The principal sent a school-wide email that afternoon, addressing the situation. She condemned the harassment, announced disciplinary action against the students involved, and reaffirmed the school's commitment to fostering a safe and inclusive environment. But the fallout was far from over. Dylan's friends lashed out online, accusing Emily and her group of ruining lives. Other students, emboldened by the principal's email, voiced their support for Emily, sharing their own stories of feeling silenced or marginalized. The school became a hotbed of debate, with tensions reaching a boiling point in the days that followed. For Emily, the victory felt bittersweet. Exposing the account had been necessary, but the backlash was intense. She received both praise and vitriol in equal measure, and the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm her. One evening, as she sat at her desk staring at the flood of messages on her phone, Linda knocked softly on her door. "Can I come in?" her mother asked gently. Emily nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Linda sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You've done something incredible, Emily. You've shown people that they can't hide behind hate. But you can't carry all of this alone." Emily leaned into her mother's embrace, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to make things better, but sometimes it feels like I'm only making things worse." Linda pulled back to meet her daughter's gaze. "Change is hard, baby. It's messy and painful, but what you're doing matters. Don't let anyone make you forget that." As the storm continued to swirl, Emily found strength in her friends, her family, and her faith. She knew the battle wasn't over, but she also knew she wasn't fighting alone. With every step forward, she was paving the way for others to follow, and that was a fight worth continuing. In the days following Mrs. Donovan's email, Eastbrook High became a battleground of conflicting emotions. Supporters of Emily's cause began wearing pins with the words, "Truth Matters," a small but visible symbol of solidarity. At the same time, Dylan's clique retaliated by spreading rumors and muttering insults under their breath whenever Emily walked by. The school was more divided than ever, and the tension reached a breaking point one morning during a heated exchange in the cafeteria. Emily was sitting with Rachel and Malik when Dylan and two of his friends approached their table. "So, what's it like being the queen of cancel culture?" Dylan sneered, his voice loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. Emily looked up, her expression calm but unyielding. "What's it like being held accountable for your actions?" she replied evenly. Dylan's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Accountable for what? Posting a few jokes? God, you people can't take a joke anymore." Malik stood, his hands clenched into fists. "It wasn't a joke when you targeted Emily. It wasn't a joke when you tried to humiliate her online. That's called harassment, Dylan." Dylan scoffed, but his friends shifted uncomfortably. "Whatever. The school's gone soft just like you." He turned to leave but stopped when he noticed a crowd forming around them. One voice broke through the murmurs. "She's right, you know," said Jake, stepping forward from the crowd. His voice was hesitant but loud enough to draw attention. "I used to think all this was just complaining, but I was wrong. What you did wasn't funny. It was cruel." Dylan's face darkened. "Seriously, Jake, you're taking her side?" Jake shrugged, his gaze steady. "Yeah, I am." The cafeteria erupted in whispers. Dylan muttered something under his breath before storming out, his friends trailing behind. Emily exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Jake's unexpected defense was a small victory, but the moment reminded her of how fragile progress could be. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself in another unexpected confrontation, this time with Mrs. Donovan. The principal had called her to the office for what she described as an important discussion. When Emily arrived, she found Mrs. Donovan seated at her desk, her expression unreadable. "Emily," she began, folding her hands, "I want to start by acknowledging the bravery you've shown throughout this process. But we need to address the current state of the school. The environment has become volatile. Emily frowned. Volatile? How? There have been reports of arguments, even physical altercations, between students over these issues, Mrs. Donovan explained. Some parents are demanding that we put a stop to the discussions entirely. They're claiming it's causing more harm than good. Emily felt a pang of frustration. So, what are you saying? That we should stop standing up for what's right because it's uncomfortable for some people? Mrs. Donovan hesitated. I'm not saying that. But we need to find a way to de-escalate the situation. I'm asking for your help in calming things down. Emily's jaw tightened. With all due respect, Mrs. Donovan, it's not my job to make people comfortable. Change is uncomfortable. If we stop now, what message does that send? The principal sighed, her expression softening. I understand where you're coming from, Emily. I do. But I'm also responsible for the safety and well-being of all our students. This situation has to be handled delicately. Emily left the office feeling conflicted. She understood Mrs. Donovan's position, but the request felt like another attempt to silence her. How could she de-escalate a conflict that wasn't her fault to begin with? That evening, Emily gathered her closest allies, Malik, Rachel, and even Sarah, who had recently begun attending their meetings. Together, they brainstormed ways to address the growing tension without compromising their message. We need to remind people what this is really about, Rachel said. It's not about dividing the school. It's about creating a space where everyone feels seen and heard. What if we host an event, Sarah suggested, something that brings people together instead of pushing them apart? Emily considered the idea. Like a community dialogue? Sarah nodded. Exactly. We could invite students, parents, and teachers to come together and share their stories. If people actually listen to each other, maybe they'll start to understand. It's worth a shot, Malik said. But we'll need to make it clear that this isn't just another debate. It has to be about connection, not conflict. Over the next week, Emily and her group worked tirelessly to plan the event, which they titled Voices of Eastbrook, A Night of Understanding. They sent invitations to the entire school community, emphasizing the importance of open-mindedness and empathy. On the night of the event, the auditorium was filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Parents, teachers, and students sat side by side, some eager to participate, others visibly skeptical. Emily opened the evening with a brief speech. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. This isn't about blame or division. It's about listening to each other, to our experiences, to our truths. Because if we can't listen, we can't move forward. The microphone was passed around, and one by one, attendees shared their stories. A black parent spoke about the challenges her son had faced at Eastbrook. A white student admitted her initial discomfort with the discussions but shared how they had opened her eyes. Even Jake, the former skeptic, took the mic, acknowledging his own biases and thanking Emily for helping him see things differently. For the first time in weeks, the room felt united, if only for a moment. But as the night drew to a close, Emily received a startling revelation. After the event, Brian approached her, his face pale. There's something else you should know, he said quietly. Dylan's been telling people he's not done. He's planning something big, something to embarrass you at the next school assembly. Emily's heart sank. What do you mean? Brian shook his head. I don't know all the details, but it's bad. Be careful, Emily. As Brian walked away, Emily's mind raced. The assembly was only days away, and now she faced the possibility of another public confrontation. But this time, she wouldn't let fear dictate her next move. With the community dialogue fresh in her mind, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. The day of the school assembly arrived with a mix of dread and determination for Emily. She had prepared her remarks carefully, knowing that this would be her most public moment yet. But Brian's warning lingered in her mind. Dylan was planning something, and she couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The assembly was held in the gymnasium, packed with students, parents, and faculty. The stage was adorned with banners celebrating diversity and inclusion, a visual reminder of the progress Emily and her peers had fought for. Yet the atmosphere crackled with tension, the unspoken divide in the room palpable. As Emily sat among the student council members waiting for her turn to speak, she noticed Dylan and his group sitting near the back. They were whispering and smirking, their phones in hand. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to focus. When the principal called her name, Emily rose from her seat and walked to the podium. Applause greeted her, though it was scattered, a mix of genuine support and polite courtesy. She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the edges of the podium as she began. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her. "I stand here today not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who believes in the power of truth and understanding. Over the past few months, we've had hard conversations about who we are as a school and who we want to be. Those conversations haven't always been easy, but they've been necessary." She glanced at the crowd, catching glimpses of both supportive and skeptical faces. "This isn't about perfection," she continued. "It's about progress, about creating a school where every student feels valued, where our differences are celebrated, not ignored. And that starts with each of us, by listening, by learning, and by holding ourselves accountable." As she spoke, a commotion stirred near the back of the room. A projector flickered to life on the far wall, and suddenly, a distorted image appeared. A mocking caricature of Emily, accompanied by hateful text. Gasps rippled through the crowd as laughter erupted from Dylan's corner. Emily froze, her heart pounding as the realization sank in. This was Dylan's plan, to humiliate her in front of everyone, to undermine everything she had worked for. But instead of retreating, Emily stepped forward. "Turn it off," the principal barked, her voice sharp as she motioned for the tech team. Within seconds, the projector went dark, but the damage was already done. The room buzzed with whispers, and all eyes were on Emily. Her mind raced. She could leave the stage and let Dylan win, or she could take control of the moment. She chose the latter. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice rising above the noise. "What just happened is exactly why we need change. This wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attack on the idea that we can be better than this. But I won't let it stop me, and I hope it won't stop any of you." The crowd fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. "This is what resistance looks like," Emily continued, her tone firm but resolute. "But resistance doesn't scare me. It fuels me, because for every person trying to tear us down, there are more of us willing to stand up. So to whoever did this, I want you to know, you didn't win today. You only made me more determined." Applause erupted, this time louder and more unified than before. Emily stood tall, her chest heaving with adrenaline as she stepped away from the podium. The assembly ended with a mixture of tension and triumph. The principal announced an investigation into the incident, promising consequences for those responsible. Dylan and his friends slipped out before anyone could confront them, but their victory was short-lived. By the next day, the school was buzzing with rumors. A teacher had caught one of Dylan's friends bragging about the stunt, and they were quickly called into the office. Within hours, the truth came out, and the perpetrators faced swift disciplinary action, including suspensions and public apologies. For Emily, the fallout brought a sense of closure, but also a deeper understanding of her journey. She met with Mrs. Donovan later that week to discuss the next steps for the school. "I have to admit," the principal said, her expression thoughtful, "your speech was one of the most powerful moments I've seen in my career. I'm sorry it came under such circumstances." Emily nodded, her tone measured. "What matters is how we move forward. This can't just be about punishing Dylan and his friends. We need to keep having these conversations, even when they're uncomfortable." Mrs. Donovan agreed, pledging to implement more initiatives focused on fostering understanding and empathy within the school. That weekend, Emily attended a community event organized by the nonprofit she had spoken for earlier. As she mingled with students and activists, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. One attendee, a college student named Mia, approached her. "Emily, I just wanted to say thank you," Mia said. "I saw the video of your assembly speech and it was incredible. You're making a difference not just at your school but beyond it." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. That means so much." As the event continued, Emily reflected on how far she had come. The journey had been messy, painful, and exhausting, but it had also been transformative. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every student who had ever felt invisible, unheard, or unwelcome. And as she stood in the glow of the event, surrounded by people who believed in the same vision, Emily knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. In the weeks following the assembly, the atmosphere at Eastbrook High began to shift. The suspension of Dylan and his friends sent a clear message that hateful actions would not be tolerated. But for Emily, the real victory came in the quieter moments, when classmates who had once been indifferent began asking questions, attending the peer-led discussions, and listening with open minds. The community dialogue event, combined with Emily's powerful response at the assembly, sparked meaningful change. Mrs. Donovan followed through on her promise to introduce new initiatives, including a mentorship program pairing upperclassmen with younger students from underrepresented backgrounds. Teachers began incorporating discussions of bias and inclusion into their lesson plans, and the student advisory board Emily had helped establish gained more influence in shaping school policies. One afternoon, as Emily walked to her locker, she was stopped by Jake. "Hey," he said awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just wanted to say I was wrong about you, about all of this. I guess I didn't really get it before, but I'm starting to now. So, thanks for not giving up." Emily smiled, her voice kind but firm. "Thanks, Jake, but don't thank me for not giving up. Thank yourself for deciding to listen. That's where it starts." He nodded, a faint smile crossing his face before he walked away. Moments like this reminded Emily that progress wasn't about sweeping victories. It was about the small, incremental changes that added up over time. At home, Emily found a new sense of balance. The chaos of the past few months had taken a toll, but with the support of her family, she began to find peace again. Her mother continued to be her biggest cheerleader, always ready with advice or a hug when Emily needed it most. "You've done something amazing," Linda said one evening as they sat together on the couch. "Not just for the school, but for yourself. You've shown the world who you are, and no one can take that away from you." Her father, too, had words of wisdom. "It's not about the applause, Emily," he said over dinner one night. "It's about the work you keep doing after the applause fades, and I know you'll keep doing it." Emily's story didn't end at Eastbrook High. The video of her assembly speech continued to circulate online, drawing attention from activists, educators, and students around the country. Invitations poured in for Emily to speak at events, share her experiences on panels, and even contribute to an online campaign promoting diversity in education. One invitation, in particular, stood out: a letter from a university offering Emily a scholarship to join their leadership program. The opportunity felt like the culmination of everything she had fought for, and as she read the letter aloud to her parents, tears streamed down her face. "You earned this," her father said, beaming with pride. On the last day of school before spring break, Emily stood in the hallway, looking at the vibrant bulletin board her group had put together. It was covered in notes and drawings from students who had participated in the peer-led discussions or attended the community dialogue event. One note caught her eye. "Thank you for giving us a voice. You've inspired me to be brave, too." The words brought a lump to her throat. She had started this journey feeling like an outsider, someone who didn't belong. Now she realized that her voice had not only made a difference, but had also empowered others to find their own. That evening, Emily met with Rachel, Malik, and Sarah for one final planning session before break. As they sat in their usual spot in the library, they reflected on everything they had accomplished. "We've come a long way, huh?" Malik said, leaning back in his chair with a grin. "Yeah," Rachel replied. "But there's still so much more to do," Emily nodded. "There always will be, but we've shown people what's possible, and that's enough for now." Sarah, who had grown into one of the group's strongest allies, smiled. "You've changed this school, Emily. We all have." They clinked their coffee cups together in a toast, their laughter echoing through the quiet library. As Emily walked home that night, the city lights twinkling around her, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew she was ready to face whatever came next. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "When you walk in your purpose, the path will show itself." Emily didn't know exactly where that path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She would keep walking, keep speaking, and keep fighting for a world where everyone's voice was heard. And as she looked up at the stars, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for her family, her friends, and the strength she had found within herself. This wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a new one. Emily's story reminds us that change often starts with one voice, her courage to speak up, even in the face of resistance, sparked a movement that transformed her school and inspired countless others. If you enjoyed this story, consider sharing it with someone who needs encouragement to stand up for what's right. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and triumph. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.